Good evening. We continue with death, desire, and incapacity this evening. The 20th chapter in The Life Divine by Sri Aurobindo. We should be able to complete the chapter tonight. He's halfway through his argument about how death comes into process of being as an instrumentality, really, of life. But only part of his argument has been made clear so far. So we'll continue with that. Beginning with this paragraph. But apart from all these necessities, there is the one fundamental necessity of the nature and object of embodied life itself, which is to seek infinite experience on a finite basis. And since the form, the basis by its very organization, limits the possibility of experience, this can only be done by dissolving it and seeking new forms. So because our experience of the embodied life as we descend here through mind, through the empowerment of life into material form, is to limit that form. We begin from that finitude, and seek the infinite. And so, to be able, in a sense, to compile the experience necessary to fulfill the cosmic purpose in this, we must go from experience to experience, from form to form. And thus, the dissolution of one form, which we call death, is necessary for us to advance to the next. It is a cosmic purpose that supports this, a necessity, a general demand on life. He continues, for the soul, having once limited itself by concentrating on the moment and the field, is driven to seek its infinity again by the principle of succession, by adding moment to moment, and thus storing up a time experience which it calls its past. In that time, it moves through successive fields, successive experiences or lives, successive accumulations of knowledge, capacity, enjoyment. And all this it holds in subconscious or superconscious memory as its fund of past acquisition in time. Subconscious or superconscious memory, wonderful. The subconscious would be that which in the old Sanskrit terminology would be the samskaras, the grooves of our nature, the vasanas, the storehouses into which half-digested impressions and undigested experiences have been poured. And all of that remains as an unseen treasure trove from which we draw continually in fashioning our individual line of karma within the universal lines of karma as the world proceeds forwards. He says all this in just a sentence. And of course there is that superconscious memory as well, because we are not simply the divided, apparently limited being who descends into time, moves from field to field, gathering moments and moments and moments to complete a natural picture of what eternity is. We are something more than that. And we know from above where we're going. It's the source of our faith. It's the source of all our hopes. It's that superconscious memory, if you will, a memory of the future.
Can you explain the division?
We'll know that when we have fulfilled our work in the process of time. So then he proceeds. To this process, change of form is essential. And for the soul involved in individual body, change of form means dissolution of the body in subjection to the law and compulsion of the all life in the material universe, to its law of supply of the material of form and demand on the material, to its principle of constant intershock and the struggle of the embodied life to exist in a world of mutual devouring. And this is the law of death. So the dissolution is necessary to comport ourselves individually with the whole play of the universe and its law of constant change. We become fodder for the next. Just as we have drawn upon the energies of others, we provide others with our energy. And this intershock, it's not a word that's frequently used in English, but it means a mutual striking or collision, like two rams butting heads or locomotives meeting. Anyway, you can see these forces in constant array, one moving forward, one meeting it, one wins, one loses. This then is the necessity and justification of death, not as a denial of life, but as a process of life. Death is necessary because eternal change of form is the sole immortality to which the finite living substance can aspire, and eternal change of experience the sole infinity to which the finite mind involved in living body can attain. So, without death, we would not be able to amass the body of experience and, in a sense, replicate infinity in our gathered universal drama. We grow with the universe. We draw from the universe. This change of form cannot be allowed to remain merely a constant renewal of the same form type, such as constitutes our bodily life between birth and death. For unless the form type is changed and the experiencing mind is thrown into new forms and new circumstances of time, place, and environment, the necessary variation of experience, which the very nature of existence in time and space demands, cannot be effectuated. So this, in a sense, is an argument for our evolution through various forms, not simply if we attain the human form, but driving us in the whole chain of evolution, upwards and forwards. The law of death, this interchange, this intershock, is necessary to us to move from the single cellular form to the form of the human, and eventually perhaps beyond the human as evolution continues. And he says, it is only the process of death by dissolution and by the devouring of life by life. It is only the absence of freedom, the compulsion, the struggle, the pain, the subjection to something that appears to be not self, which makes this necessary and salutary change appear terrible and undesirable to our mortal mentality. It is the sense of being devoured, broken up, destroyed, or forced away, which is the sting of death, and which even the belief in personal survival of death cannot wholly abrogate. So, we pass through death, and it seems awful to us, happening to ourselves or happening to somebody close to us, because it seems to be imposed from outside. It's not something that we wish, because we, again, have forgotten our universality. We have neglected through that act of self-ignoring what we really are, and have identified with this small piece of machinery which is moving through time. Because of that, and because we are secretly complicit, conspiratorial, breathing together with the universal will, that we are willing in our soul to put down the body, but the outer form is not, is reluctant, more than reluctant, afraid, outraged. And so this sting of death cannot be assuaged merely because we have fashioned a belief in the personal survival of death. A belief is inadequate. He leaves this almost an incomplete statement. But you no longer fear death when you live in what is whole, when you live in the spiritual consciousness, when you have realized Atman, the self, Brahman, the divine. Death has no sting. You have no fear of it any longer. You are in a state of abhaya, fearlessness. But this process, Sri Aurobindo says, is a necessity of that mutual devouring, which we see to be the initial law of life in matter. Life, says the Upanishad, is hunger that is death. And by this hunger which is death, ashanaya mrityu, the material world has been created. Well, this goes back to the opening citation in this chapter from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, 1:2-1. This is that thing. Life in its first manifestation here appears as hunger. It has to eat to survive. So it becomes that which imposes death. It is the compromise that it has to reach with matter to be able to sustain itself in this world, which seems inimical to its presence. Seems. For life here, he writes, assumes as its mold material substance. And material substance is being, infinitely divided and seeking infinitely to aggregate itself. Okay. Material substance is being, sat. He has equated the principle of matter with sat, but the unity of sat has been infinitely distributed. He has associated earlier in this chapter life with conscious power, chit shakti. So sat and chit are two of the three terms of Satchit Ananda, so crucial to the philosophy of the life divine. But this being infinitely divided here, has to seek, because of the inner compulsion within it, to reaggregate, to take that disintegration and reintegrate. The attempt, let me see, did I finish this sentence though? Between these two impulses of infinite division and infinite aggregation, the material existence of the universe is constituted. Let me read that entire sentence. I'm not confident that I read it. For life here assumes as its mold material substance. And material substance is being infinitely divided and seeking infinitely to aggregate itself. Between these two impulses of infinite division and infinite aggregation, the material existence of the universe is constituted. So in a sense, you could say that life densifies itself and installs itself as a universal presence in this material world, with this impulse of division and aggregation constantly operative within it. The attempt of the individual, the living atom, to maintain and aggrandize itself is the whole sense of desire. A physical, vital, moral, mental increase by a more and more all-embracing experience, a more and more all-embracing possession, absorption, assimilation, enjoyment, is the inevitable fundamental, the inevitable, fundamental, ineradicable impulse of existence. Once divided and individualized, yet ever secretly conscious of its all-embracing, all-possessing infinity. So it doesn't sound here, from the tone of this, that desire is something to be expunged. Desire is a necessary impetus in the universe to reclaim the ultimate integration through aggregation that we seek. He says the impulse to realize that secret consciousness is the spur of the cosmic divine, the lust of the embodied self within every individual creature. And it is inevitable, just, salutary, that it should seek to realize it first in the terms of life by an increasing growth and expansion. So desire is a laudable force in the universe. It has a role to play. It drives the engine forward. It is an expression of life power, which is itself an expression through the mind of Chit Shakti, the conscious force, who dominates all existence, no? This is the second time he's used this adjective in this chapter, salutary, which means promoting health. So it is healthy for one to have this as a motive power in one's life. If there's a point at which we can tease the core behind desire away from its outer forms and use it in its purer force, we will do that. That is coming in future chapters. In the physical world, this can only be done by feeding on the environment, by aggrandizing oneself through the absorption of others or of what is possessed by others. And this necessity is the universal justification of hunger in all its forms. Still, what devours must also be devoured. For the law of interchange, of action and reaction, of limited capacity, and therefore of a final exhaustion and succumbing, governs all life in the physical world. So we and all will be drawing materiality, the force of life, vital power, into ourselves. We'll digest it. And however much we think we have gathered unto ourselves, and we think we're the end of all being, we too will be consumed. However large a vessel we think we are, somebody will tip it over the universe, perhaps, and drink it down to the bottom. Again, this is the eater eating is eaten in the Taittiriya Upanishad, which we spent a good deal of time on last week. So to this point, he's talking about death and desire. In the conscious mind, that which was still only a vital hunger in subconscious life transforms itself into higher forms. Hunger in the vital parts becomes craving of desire in the mentalized life, straining of will in the intellectual or thinking life. So this motivation, basic to life, we can call it desire if we like, kama, has one manifestation in the physicality, another manifestation in our vitality, another manifestation in various grades of our mental existence. As we become mentalized, desire appears in the mind. And that, as it grows with the intellect of the human, becomes will. So the basic subconscious hunger develops into conscious desire, I want that, and that develops into will, I will have that. This movement of desire, he writes, must and ought to continue until the individual has grown sufficiently so that he can now at last become master of himself and, by increasing union with the infinite, possessor of his universe. So it is as we drop the limited definition of ourselves and grow into communion with the infinite that we can increase our mastery of self and complete that suffusion of our being into that which makes us a perfect partner in this universe for the divine and its manifesting will. Desire, he writes, is the lever by which the divine life principle affects its end of self-affirmation in the universe, and the attempt to extinguish it in the interests of inertia is a denial of the divine life principle, a will not to be, which is necessarily ignorance. For one cannot cease to be individually, except by being infinitely. Desire is necessary for the soul expressing the universal will to affirm itself, and for us to cancel it out and say, no, it is better for us to sit still and not have desire, annuls the purpose of the cosmos. Rather, we should outgrow it, not suffocate it, but outgrow it. This universal process pushes us towards an enlargement and towards a perfection, a fulfillment, a siddhi. Not a cancellation of our being and a retraction of ourselves into an extra cosmic space or time or absence of both, which is in some undefinable way to be preferred to cosmic action. Meanwhile, it has to progress from the type of a mutually devouring hunger to the type of a mutual giving, of an increasingly joyous sacrifice of interchange. The individual gives himself to other individuals and receives them back in exchange. The lower gives itself to the higher, and the higher to the lower, so that they may be fulfilled in each other. The human gives itself to the divine, and the divine to the human. The all in the individual gives itself to the all in the universe, and receives its realized universality as a divine recompense. This is almost a transcription of a passage from the Bhagavad Gita in the 4th chapter. I think it's the 24th shloka. Om Brahmarpanam Brahma Havi Brahmagnau Brahmana Hutam Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina. The divine is the act of offering. The divine is the substance that is offered. The divine is the fire into which the offering is poured. The divine is the one who offers. The divine is the destination of one who works in communion with the divine. This is a cycle of giving, and when we consciously participate in it, when it is no more a struggle, something extracted from us by the processes of nature as we waken to ourselves, but something that we deliberately, intentionally, joyously offer as a movement of exaltation, then we are striking chords of harmony within ourselves that resonate across the universe. Thus, he says, the law of hunger must give place progressively to the law of love, the law of division to the law of unity, the law of death to the law of immortality. Such is the necessity, such the justification, such the culmination and self-fulfillment of the desire that is at work in the universe. As this mask of death, which life assumes, results from the movement of the infinite seeking to affirm its immortality, so desire is the impulse of the force of being, individualized in life, to affirm progressively in the terms of succession in time and of self-extension in space, in the framework of the finite, its infinite bliss, the ananda of Satchit Ananda. So just as before, he spoke about the being which infinitely divides itself, reaggregating through this empowerment of life in the cosmos. And that life itself is the installation of that conscious force of existence. Here, finally, after speaking of Sat and speaking of Chit, now he speaks of Ananda. The framework of the infinite, its infinite bliss, the Ananda of Satchidananda appears. The mask of desire, which that impulse assumes, comes directly from the third phenomenon of life, its law of incapacity. Life is an infinite force working in the terms of the finite. Inevitably, throughout its overt individualized action in the infinite, its omnipotence must appear and act as a limited capacity and a partial impotence, although behind every act of the individual, however weak, however futile, however stumbling, there must be the whole superconscious and subconscious presence of infinite, omnipotent force. Without that presence behind it, no least single movement in the cosmos can happen. Into its sum of universal action, each single act and movement falls by the fiat of the omnipotent omniscience, which works as the supermind inherent in things. So, while it is necessary for us to suffer from incapacity in the state of division, abstracted from what we really are and cast into a somersault, landing finally in a material form, we cannot have at our beck and call the infinite force which really we can wield, but can wield only when we have restored our sense of self to that which is at one with the Supreme. But, he writes, the individualized life force is to its own consciousness limited and full of incapacity. This is our current experience. For it has to work not only against the mass of other environing individualized life forces, but also subject to control and denial by the infinite life itself, with whose total will and trend its own will and trend may not immediately agree. Because we've lost cosmicity and dwell in our aware parts only in the individual form, we can't be in full concert until we commune with the cosmic. That means, as he writes here, therefore, limitation of force, phenomenon of incapacity, is the third of the three characteristics of individualized and divided life. On the other hand, the impulse of self-enlargement and all possession remains, and it does not and is not meant to measure or limit itself by the limit of its present force or capacity. So, your current limitation is not your definition. It is not a delimitation. It's a beginning point, and one grows back towards the fullness of the cosmic force. Hence, from the gulf between the impulse to possess and the force of possession, desire arises. For if there were no such discrepancy, if the force could always take possession of its object, always attain securely its end, desire would not come into existence, but only a calm and self-possessed will without craving, such as is the will of the divine. So, an incapacity to seize pushes us forwards. This discrepancy between our impulse to possess and our capacity to possess means that there's a gulf. And so we try harder and build force through the effort. To continue, if the individualized force were the energy of a mind free from ignorance, no such limitation, no such necessity of desire would intervene. For a mind not separated from supermind, a mind of divine knowledge, would know the intention, scope, and inevitable result of its every act, and would not crave or struggle, but put forth an assured force, self-limited to the immediate object in view. It would, even in stretching beyond the present, even in undertaking movements not intended to succeed immediately, yet not be subject to desire or limitation. Remember the caveat here. He's talking about mind as it exists as an extension of the supramental consciousness. A mind not separated from that would have that sense. For the failures also of the divine are acts of its omniscient omnipotence, which knows the right time and circumstance for the incipients, the vicissitudes, the immediate, and the final results of all its cosmic undertakings. The mind of knowledge, being in unison with the divine supermind, would participate in this science in the true sense of the term, knowledge, and this all-determining power. So, if this mind were linked to that supramental consciousness, this could be our view of things. We would be acting and experience the world in unison with that. Our power, as wielded or distributed through us, would be all affecting, because it would be all determining. But that suggests that even if we're not there now, knowing that mind is derived from that, we can reascend and reconnect, reintegrate ourselves, and be that all-aggregating force in creation. Hear that we are there. But he writes, but as we have seen, individualized life force here is an energy of individualizing and ignorant mind that has fallen from the knowledge of its own supermind. So lost in its individuality, forgetting the all, forgetting the transcendence from which all and individual come. Therefore, incapacity is necessary to its relations in life and inevitable in the nature of things. For the practical omnipotence of an ignorant force, even in a limited sphere, is unthinkable, since in that sphere such a force would set itself against the working of the divine and omniscient omnipotence, and unfix the fixed purpose of things, an impossible cosmic situation. There may be comic book heroes or villains who attain such a mastery of things, but the universe, by its self-law, prevents it. The struggle of limited forces, increasing their capacity by that struggle under the driving impetus of instinctive or conscious desire, is therefore the first law of life. That struggle we see even in the mythology of India as represented in the Asuras, who try to amass to themselves all the powers of the cosmos and inevitably draw a response and a retort from the divine, who sends an emissary, a seemingly weak individual who is yet able to thwart and overturn the Asuric intention and render the Asura into a state of wakefulness. What is interesting in many of those mythological stories is how the Asura is glad to be awakened from his leaden ignorance, glad to be restored, even through the struggle, even through the wrestle, back to the embrace of the divine. This is this figure, as M.P. Pandit says in his commentary on the Thousand Faces of the Divine Mother, Sri Lalita Sahasranama, as the loud and blatant ego. That ego, driven by desire, necessarily comes to its own ruin so that it can grow farther. And that which seems dark be included again in a still greater brightness. And he writes here in these closing sentences, and this again has eventually to become the happy shock of divine interchange, this strenuous clasp of love replacing the convulsive clasp of strife. Still, strife is a necessary and salutary beginning. Death, desire, and strife are the trinity of divided living, the triple mask of the divine life principle in its first essay of cosmic self-affirmation. Salutary again. Death is salutary, healthy, because it forces us to exchange a worn-out tenement for yet something more in which we can grow and try to gather enough experience to taste all that exists in the cosmos and in all of its potentiality. Desire is salutary because it goads us forward, and we try to reaggregate and try to reunify with the many and the all around us. Strife is that mode of conflict which leads us not to a violent struggle, but to the clasp of amity, of concord, of love, of mutuality. So, linked together, we can go farther and we can go faster. This idea, a conscious wrestling of brother forces in which the victor and vanquished, well, it stirs in me a memory of how Mother used to play tennis when she was young on the courts of Paris. She didn't like to play with people that she could easily beat. She liked to play with stronger, older people who could give her a real whipping, because it was through that kind of give and take that she could grow, that she could learn, and eventually come to equal their strokes with her own. And so it is with our experience in life. She was doing it consciously as a part of her deliberate growth when she was a child. M.P. Pandit was also a master tennis player. And I'll say a few words about him in a moment because today is his birthday. 97 years ago, Madhav Pundalik Pandit was born, a felicity given to the earth. I would like to share with you, though, a passage from Savitri, taken from Book 2, Canto 4, The Kingdoms of the Little Life. An eyeless power that sees no more its aim, a restless, hungry energy of will, life cast her seed in the body's indolent mold. It woke from happy torpor, a blind force, compelling it to sense and seek and feel. In the enormous labor of the void, perturbing with her dreams the vast routine and dead roll of a slumbering universe, the mighty prisoner struggled for release. Alive with her yearning woke the inert cell. In the heart she kindled a fire of passion and need. Amid the deep calm of inanimate things arose her great voice of toil and prayer and strife. A groping consciousness in a voiceless world, a guideless sense was given her for her road. Thought was withheld, and nothing now she knew, but all the unknown was hers to feel and clasp. Obeying the push of unborn things towards birth, out of her seal of insentient life she broke. In her substance of unthinking, mute soul strength that cannot utter what its depths divine, awoke a blind necessity to know. The chain that bound her, she made her instrument. Instinct was hers, the chrysalis of truth, and effort and growth and striving nescience. Inflicting on the body desire and hope, imposing on consciousness, she brought into matter's dull tenacity her anguished claim to her lost sovereign right, her tireless search, her vexed uneasy heart, her wandering unsure steps, her cry for change. I think there was no book that Madhav Pandit loved more than Savitri. Evening after evening, he covered its every line and eliminated all the fog that might gather around it, intimidating people from reading these great lines carved out of gold. For he had a capacity to write and to speak in a way that was akin to the mother's. He was, in a sense, a channel of her force and consciousness, and more of her love. He was all hers. One came to know this about him through intimate experience. As one person wrote in a commemorative volume on his 50th birthday, the MP stood for Mother Prone. Everything took him into her infinite consciousness. I mentioned his commentary on Sri Lalita Sahasranama, 1,000 names of the Divine Mother. each one of which opens a door to the experience of her as an infinite, beyond all names, and yet every name is a mode of approach. And just so, in all the beings whom Madhav met, he found a gate in them somewhere opening to the mother. And so even towards people who pledged towards him an enmity, he refrained from that and only offered them a deep understanding, a sense of compassion and love. Champaklal, who was that great souled attendant of both the mother and Sri Aurobindo, years and years after she left her body, told someone who wondered, what can I do now that mother is gone? What hope is there? He said, mother works now chiefly through MP Pandit, through Madhav. You can experience her greatness through him. It isn't that we should take that too literally, but to know that each one of us who becomes conscious of our souls becomes a part of her. We sit in her lap. And if he was avid of anything, it was that each person should be able to experience that joy, that ananda, that comes from immersing oneself in the infinite. Because there one does find infinite bliss, infinite conscious force, infinite existence. And when you come back from that experience, you're not merely refreshed, you're surcharged with the divine force that becomes pullant in this world. He came to the ashram in 1939 as an aspirant wishing to reach fulfillment in spiritual life. But by the end of his life, he cared no more whether he himself achieved enlightenment, but he labored for the enlightenment of the globe. As the mother outgrew the walls of the ashram and said eventually, all the world is my ashram now, so MP Pandit represented that globality, that oneness with all. When he traveled outside of India to America, to Europe, other places in Asia, he found only holy ground upon which to stand. He found only aspiring souls with which to converse and commune. As it was for the mother, it was for him, and it will be for everyone who sincerely wants to find the source of their self, leans inside and finds the soul, arcs upwards and lives in the universal self, transcends all, and discovers the omnipresent divine. Madhav was a great leader because he exemplified what he taught. Because he lived it, he transmitted it, let us work from within that circle of fraternity. One light leaning into another. One hand helping up another. A happy birthday, a bonne fête, a felicity for us all today. M.P. Pandit's 97th birthday. His centenary is approaching. So, let us get ready. 100 is a symbol of fulfillment. Anyway, next week, the chapter is The Ascent of Life, the 21st chapter in the Life Divine. See you then. It's almost, at that point, the summer solstice, I guess. So whatever that conveys or portends. Jai Ma. Namaste.
Namaste.